Howdy my totally as always tubular gamers. We're back with, you guessed it, another video. Thanks for coming back to the channel. If you're new here, maybe stick around a while. I got a fun video. Today we're talking about Final Fantasy VII games. Oh yeah, Final Fantasy VII.
Now when it comes to RPGs, it's hard to find a game that's more influential or widely recognized than Final Fantasy VII. Truly one of the most influential games of the entire genre. Final Fantasy VII really can be credited as like the game that popularized RPGs on a much grander scale than had ever been seen before. Obviously there were plenty of amazing RPGs before Final Fantasy VII, but after Final Fantasy VII, RPGs would never be the same again. And it really is one of the most beloved games of all time. And then Square Enix left it. They moved on to 8, 9, 10, but then in the 2000s they went, everybody loves 7. What if we brought back more of 7? What if we did more about the world of Final Fantasy VII? And so we got Crisis Core, we eventually got Durge of Cerberus. Shit, we even got a movie. We really were seeing sides to the series that we never thought were possible. They really were expanding everything. And then it went quiet. There wasn't a Final Fantasy VII game for many years. There was that mock remake, but then finally there really was a real Final Fantasy VII Remake. It looked incredible after many years of development. We finally did get it in 2020. But it was just the first part. Here we are all the way in 2024 and we finally gotten the second part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Rebirth, and today I'm going to talk to y'all about the Final Fantasy VII games. There's been several throughout the years, enough to the point where I can rank them all. I mean, I ranked all the Persona 5 games. I'm going to rank all the Final Fantasy VII games. Final Fantasy VII is like my favorite Final Fantasy. It's probably got my favorite world and characters. I love it to death. One day I'll rank all of the mainline games or like every FF title, but today it really is just all about 7. We'll be ranking these games worst to best, stacking them up against each other, seeing which ones are worth playing, which ones are worth avoiding. Let me know down below what your favorite Final Fantasy VII game is. As per usual, I'm not including any mobile games, which means several FF7 titles aren't getting included because there's actually a surprising amount of mobile games throughout the years, but nope, not looking at any of them. It needs to be officially released on a console or PC, and it needs to also be in English because I can't read kanji. So with that, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you want to see down below. We got the super thanks and the Patreon. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. Seriously, thank you very much. Any support is very welcome and I really do appreciate it. Y'all are awesome. Let's get right into it. What's the weakest of the Final Fantasy VII games? It really shouldn't come as a surprise that I believe the weakest game with the Final Fantasy VII name is Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis. Now, normally I wouldn't even look at a game like this as I don't really talk about mobile games on the channel, but this game was actually released on PC. So this is a free-to-play gacha game that really brings together Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Crisis Core Reunion, and it has some of its own original content in there as well. And you actually do get to play through these games, kind of. It's very abridged. It kind of feels like a best of rather than, you actually going through the game and it telling a story. I mean, they skip a bunch of important details and events, like they skip the bombing mission at the beginning of the game. How? They just do. But I mean, I've seen worse storytelling in a game. It could be Dragon Quest Legend of Dai, where it's just static screens and people talking. This is better than that. At least some of the old music's here, and that's always going to be great. When it comes to the battle system, it's really basic. I mean, this is a gacha mobile game at the end of the day. It uses the ATB battle system, where this bar fills up, and once it fills up a certain amount, you can use moves. There is an auto feature. The game just straight up recommends it, tells you to use the auto battle, where it does actually like everything for you in the most optimal way possible. So yeah, I guess might as well use the auto, but it's not exactly fun or engaging. I mean, I could literally just eat some food and let the game play itself for me. That is, until I need to grind. Like every gacha mobile game, there's going to be some grinding here. You're going to hit a wall eventually and you will have to grind, and yeah, the grinding seems pretty ridiculous in this game. You will have to grind a lot and you'll rarely get any good materia drops, or you could just spend money. The game does kind of seem pretty pay to win in that aspect. On top of this game's interface is just horrible. Like, I opened up some of these menus and just went, what am I looking at? Like, there's just so much garbage all over the screen. There's way too much information. Am I playing a video game here, or am I looking at some detailed HR spreadsheet or like a patient's chart, like when they go to the doctor? Like, what even is this? There's just way too much shit on screen, and then you want me to pay money or grind? How about neither? How about I turn the game off and never play it again? Yeah, I didn't play a ton of this game. I didn't particularly care for it. Gachas really aren't my thing. This game didn't change that. At least it wasn't the worst gacha. I have seen legit way worse. I mean, at the end of the day, it still is Final Fantasy VII. It still is the music. The presentation is pretty decent. And, it does have a greatest hits, I guess, of the Final Fantasy VII story. So it could be a lot worse. But even being free to play, I still wouldn't recommend this. Legit, go play any any other Final Fantasy VII game. This isn't the worst Final Fantasy mobile game I've ever seen, and it certainly won't be the last, but it's not worth your time. And so here we have Durge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII, which came out for the PS2 in 2006. Nowadays, I don't hear a ton of people talk about this game, and there really is a reason for that. This game is such an anomaly in the Final Fantasy franchise, like, it feels so out of place. So the game is a sequel to Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, but it's also a spin-off. It doesn't star Cloud or Tifa or Sephiroth. The game is actually about Vincent Valentine, and the game is a third-person shooter. While the game does have RPG elements, it very much is a shooter. It can be played in first person, but I always hated how this looks, so I always say it's a third person shooter, and also sadly isn't very good. I remember getting this game well over a decade ago for under $10. I've just wanted to check everything out that was Final Fantasy VII related, but then I only played like an hour or two of this game, and it really just didn't sit with me, and I actually didn't try it again until I was going to work on this video. And yeah, I can see why I dropped it. It's a pretty mediocre third person shooter that does take place in the world of Final Fantasy VII, but it doesn't really do anything meaningful with it, and it feels like it should have been so much more than it is. I mean, Vincent is pretty awesome. He's probably the most popular optional character in like any video game, at least in the original game. He's great in the movie, and here they really do flesh him out. You know, they give him a bit more backstory, and you really get to see everything about his past. But the actual plot of the game is about him going up against this organization known as Deep Ground, and this story, unfortunately, it's just kind of okay. Maybe it's just me. I didn't find it all that intriguing or engaging, and by the time it was over, I was just like, oh, it's over. All right. At the very least, there is some good fan service here, and if you really loved Vincent's story in Final Fantasy VII, you'll like that side of it. The rest of it, though, yeah, it's just kind of forgettable. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, as I've said a few times, it is a shooter. It does not play like any other Final Fantasy game you've ever played. It's a very linear shooter where you pretty much shoot everything that moves. If you've ever played a shooter from the mid-2000s, you'll immediately understand how this game works. You aren't like actively taking cover, you're just kind of running around shooting, again, basically everything. You'll go through some very linear areas, you'll gun down a bunch of familiar looking enemies, you'll take on some bosses, and when it comes to Vincent's arsenal, you actually do get to customize it. This is probably the most RPG aspect, is you get to customize his weapons to fit your playstyle, and this is unique. It's a little different from other shooters at the time. Vincent can also turn into monsters still, and these are useful as well. They're probably more useful than they were in the original Final Fantasy VII, and you know, it is a Final Fantasy game. As you defeat enemies, you'll gain experience and level up, yada yada yada. You know how all of that goes. There is one level where you actually get to play as Cait Sith, and it's like a stealth level. This is very interesting, and it is a good change of pace. I will give it that. Now, what I didn't like about this game pretty much right from the get-go is just how it feels. This game does not feel or control all that well. Like, it's not terrible. It's very much functional, and you can get used to it, but it just doesn't feel all that nice. I didn't find the gunplay particularly satisfying. None of the weapons feel amazing. The gunplay wasn't really anything special. It's pretty mindless and standard for the time, and I feel like the gunplay, really the combat in general, just doesn't really excel at anything. It's fine, it has its moments, it's not terrible, but I wouldn't really say it's all that good either. It's just kind of alright, it's there. The AI is also not very good in this game. A lot of the time it feels like you're playing just target practice, and a lot of these encounters really lack excitement or really any kind of memorable set pieces. It has a few set pieces, but nothing all that special. And if the game is a shooter and the shooting isn't all that exciting or amazing, well, that's a pretty big problem. The game also is actually pretty long, taking well over 10 hours to beat. There is some side content here, and I just thought the pacing and the flow wasn't all that great either. It just kind of goes on, and I was just kind of waiting for it to end, as it really wasn't keeping me all that engaged, especially by the end of it. Again, this game isn't bad, but I wouldn't say it's good either. It really is just a mixed bag, but would I recommend it? If you love Final Fantasy VII, especially Vincent, then yes, I think you'll be able to overlook the game's issues and you'll still have a good time with it. Otherwise, no, you can totally skip it. It's interesting to look back on, but yeah, the game isn't exactly all that great. And so here we have Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion. Now, this is a updated remaster of the original PSP game that released back in 2008. Now, I had never touched the original game until this remaster came out, and after playing through it, I gotta say I was actually thoroughly surprised with how much I enjoyed this game. So the game is a prequel to the original Final Fantasy VII, taking place many years before, and stars Zack Fair. And it's about his exploits in Soldier. Now, Zack, you know, I knew a little bit about him from Final Fantasy VII, but I wasn't really attached to him or anything. But after playing Crisis Core, I actually really do enjoy Zack. I see now why so many people like Zack. Zack is one of the better protagonists to Final Fantasy. He's likable, he's got a good heart, and he's kind of goofy sometimes, and yeah, I really did like him. So with this being a prequel to FF7, we already know what's going to happen to really all of these characters, but the story is still interesting. They still found ways to make it interesting, and it's great to see some of these characters, you know, before their Final Fantasy VII arcs, or what they were like before Cloud became everyone's favorite character. And this game has a really powerful ending. It's really quite gut-wrenching, actually. So when it comes to the gameplay, this was the first of the action RPG Final Fantasy games, at least by release order, and this remaster does tweak a few things. It does update the controls a bit, especially since we have a second analog stick now, and it makes things smoother than the original PSP release. But what the gameplay is it's an action RPG, and it's a quite linear action RPG. A majority of the game you're spent exploring these zones or moving in a straight line. With Zack being in Soldier, he's pretty proficient in combat. You know, he has this big ass sword that he can use, and he has a bunch of different techniques he can do with it, and eventually he can just go nuts with the Buster Sword. But he also has a number of spells that he learns throughout the game that you can use, and then there's of course items and some special abilities that use the ATB bar. He also has summons, but the way summons work in this game is quite different. Instead, there's actually a slot machine that is constantly going in the top left corner. Then depending on the match and depending on the numbers, you can actually get a number of different summons and abilities through these, like invincibility or everything like your health, magic, ATB bar maxing out, or just summoning a giant monster to attack. And the combat, you know, it actually plays incredibly similar to the Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's actually very similar in a number of areas. The only area that really it's different is how the ATB bar is. Here it's not constantly regenerating, it is a stat like your magic or your health, and you do have to use items to replenish it or just get lucky with the slot machine. Now the combat I actually quite like in this game. It's actually really satisfying, especially when you get those criticals. The use of magic is nice, and I like all the abilities you get. The only thing I'm not really a huge fan of is the slot machine. Like, the slot machine just feels so out of place here. It just doesn't really feel like it belongs in a game like this, let alone in the combat, right in the thick of things. And because it's so random, since, you know, it's a slot machine, it can really affect the difficulty of these fights. There are plenty of fights that I had where I absolutely just steamrolled the boss or the enemies because I got lucky with the slot machine, and then I found myself using it as a crutch a number of times when I had any difficulty. I was like, alright, well, hopefully I just get something good on the slot machine, and then, oh, what do you know, I got invincibility for like 10 seconds and I just whoop the enemy's ass. There's one boss towards the end of the game that you actually have a time limit on to beat, and really the only way to beat it is just by getting lucky on the slot machine, and I didn't like that fight at all. It was just kind of poorly designed, and I just don't really care for the slot machine. I think it disrupts the gameplay too much. It's just not needed, because without it, I think the combat's actually really solid and one of the better combat systems of the Final Fantasy action RPGs. Now, outside of the combat, there's a little exploration here, but there's really not a lot. The side quests are pretty limited here, and they do throw some mini games in, you know, that are pretty similar to Final Fantasy VII and the remake, and these are fine enough. They aren't really too out of nowhere. The sniper minigame towards the end of the game was pretty funny, though, to see in an FF title. I think the pacing is actually really good in this game. It's constantly going. There's really never a dull moment, and a few times it almost felt like it started to drag, but then something really interesting happens, and I really enjoyed my time with it. I was thoroughly engaged, and I really wanted to see what was going to happen. Again, I like Zack. I like the story. The presentation's great. This game looks leagues better than the PSP title. It runs well, and the music is also great. Like, the music is amazing in this game. I really like the music, actually. It's not the longest, taking me only around like 10 hours to finish, but it was a really satisfying 10 hours that, again, I really enjoyed. And if you're a fan of Final Fantasy VII, you're going to really like this game. If you don't really care for Final Fantasy VII, then I don't think you're going to like this game very much. But if you like action RPGs, if you like the Final Fantasy VII Remake, then I really think that this game is worth playing. And again, this game was better than I thought it was going to be. I hadn't heard like amazing things about it, but I heard people liked it, and yeah, I actually really liked it, so go try it. And here we have the Final Fantasy VII Remake that initially came out in 2020, probably the most hyped remake of all time. I and everybody else waited a long ass time for this game, but I was so excited when I finally got it. I very much remember it was like right at the start of COVID, everyone was locked inside, and so I just played this game all day and night. I beat it in like 3 or 4 days. I was obsessed with this game. I was like in love with this game. I really enjoyed it, and I went back and played through the game again for Rebirth with my partner, and those feelings really didn't go away. I really do enjoy the Final Fantasy VII Remake. It just hit in all the right places, whether it was the combat, the world, the amazing presentation, or the storytelling. This game, it really is top notch. At least for me it was. When it comes to this game's story, it is a reimagining, retelling of Final Fantasy VII, but it's actually only the early parts of Final Fantasy VII, as the game is only Midgar, which was maybe 25% of the original game, if that. But no, the game isn't only a few hours. They have heavily expanded on legit every single aspect of the story here. They've introduced a bunch of new set pieces, characters, locations, and events that are just straight up new to the entire franchise, and I'm all here for it. The pacing has been grinded down to a halt compared to what the original game had, and I know plenty of people don't like this game's pacing. They don't like that it is rather slow and it does take its time, but I really enjoyed how the game takes its time. It really fleshes out the world and characters more than the original ever could. But yeah, it's not exactly everyone's cup of tea. I personally, though, really did enjoy the story, and I like where it goes. The story itself, you know, it's about Cloud, and yeah, that's all I'm really going to say, actually. The less I say about the story, the better. Final Fantasy VII really has one of those unforgettable stories, and the way that it's retold in Remake, I really enjoyed. It's different from the original game, and even if you're like super crazy familiar with the original game's story, you're still going to be intrigued and kept on your toes from this game's story. I think it's very good, and the ending is also very powerful. Now, the first thing most people notice when they see this game is the presentation. This game just looks phenomenal, especially the PS5 version. Like, Rebirth doesn't really look all that much better than this game because this game already looked amazing. It just is so good from a graphical perspective. The character models are so true to life and look so good. The animation's great. The environments look excellent. The frame rate is super smooth. Yeah, there is some JPEG backgrounds thrown in there, but the presentation, oh, it's so good in this game. And the voice acting is also very well done. The music's just phenomenal. It has a bunch of the old music. There's a ton of new remixes and versions of the old music. It's all so good. Now, when it comes to what you're actually doing in this game, the game is drastically different from the original game. It's much more of a modern third-person action RPG, a very linear one at that. With it being only in the city, it is rather linear. The level design usually is just a straight line most of the time, and you won't ever really stray too far from the main path. There are side missions here, but a majority of the game you're just doing the main quest. Now, this game also, in terms of its structure and pacing, is very much like a modern game where it's third person over the shoulder. You'll frequently be walking slowly and just listening to dialogue, and you'll regularly go minutes on end without any action at all, and that's fine with me. Not everyone's cup of tea, but I enjoyed it. When it comes to the actual combat, it is very much an action RPG. They, for the most part, have left the menus of the original game. You can play as Cloud, Tifa, Barret, or Aerith. All of them play incredibly different from each other. They all have their own unique play style, and I really love how different all of these characters play from each other. None of them feel alike. They all have their own abilities, moveset, and really just play style. It's really cool. Obviously, playing as Cloud is probably the best, but the other characters are nothing to scoff at either. Barret's a great time how you get to just gun everything down. Tifa low-key feels like a fighting game at times where you're just beating the shit out of everything. And Aerith has a bunch of spells and abilities. You have just a standard attack, but as you attack enemies, your ATB bar will fill up, and then you can use abilities, spells, or items. And I think this is a great mix of the old menu system from the original FF7, but it still very much is a modern action RPG, and it feels great. The flow of the combat is just fantastic in this game. The way everything comes together, it just works so well. It's actually quite innovative how they really have blended together the old and the new to come up with this beast of a combat system. I really enjoyed the combat. I love playing as the different characters. I like how you can still control the party at large. They have the stagger system from Final Fantasy 13, which I never would have expected to work as well as it does. Fighting the enemies are engaging. They all have strengths and weaknesses and different moves. The bosses in this game go really hard. Seriously, the bosses are actually excellent in this game. They're all engaging to fight and are just very well designed. The combat in general is incredibly well designed. It's some of the best action RPG combat you'll find in any video game. Outside of the combat, there is a bit going on with this game. Like I said, you'll be walking around exploring these areas, listening to a lot of dialogue, but there's actually a lot of mini-games. The original game had tons of mini-games, and really every mini-game returns here, even if they were annoying in the original. They are all here. There's plenty of new ones as well. I'm not going to spoil any, but I'll just say the mini-games, for the most part, I think they are pretty good. They were generally well executed. All of these side missions, though, it's a bit hit and miss. Some of them really just do miss, and some of them are pretty decent. but they are all entirely optional and you don't have to do any of them. Regardless, the game does have a good length to it of around 30 to 40 hours, and I really enjoyed the game. I think the moment-to-moment gameplay is great, the combat's solid, the exploration's decent, the side content and mini-games are exciting enough. I think the story, characters, and world are pretty exceptional. Like, they were great in the original game, but seeing everything so fleshed out, it just hits different. It's very much a different game from the original, but it still is great nonetheless, and I have no problem recommending it to anybody. Even if you don't like RPGs, I think you're still gonna like this one. But then we have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, I've been playing this game pretty much non-stop since I got it a few days ago, and this game is nothing short of incredible. I feel like I've been fantasizing this game for so long at this point. Like, just thinking about how they would remake certain aspects of Final Fantasy VII, and to see it finally come to fruition, and not only come to fruition, it's even better than I expected. Oh, it is a dream come true. You've probably heard a lot of people praising the hell out of this game, and I'm about to do the exact same. The game is a direct sequel to the Final Fantasy VII Remake and sees Cloud and friends exploring the world outside of Midgar, and that's all I'm gonna say. The story, oh, it is so good in this game. It is just as good, if not even better than remakes. Like Remake, it is incredibly fleshed out. It's given a lot of time to breathe. The pacing, it is a little faster than remakes, but it is relatively slow with the pacing. The breakneck speed of the original is not there, but there is so much depth and density to basically every single aspect of the story and the characters, their arcs, their feelings, emotions. Everything is just so fleshed out, especially Sephiroth. He's really fleshed out here, and it's great. I love the story to this game. It continues some of the more interesting aspects of the remake, and I'm really curious to see where they go with this and how they wrap things up. The story, it really is fantastic. When it comes to the presentation, it doesn't really look that much better than the Final Fantasy VII Remake on PS5, but I mean, the game looked phenomenal anyway. This game looks exceptional as well. The character models are some of the best character models you'll find in any game. The textures look great. The frame rate is silky smooth. Presentation is just fantastic. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, it plays very similarly to the remake, but it's a lot more refined, and the structure of the game is totally different. The remake was incredibly linear. There was only a few areas you could even explore. There was a handful of side missions, but the game was very linear. This game is not like that. There are plenty of sections and chapters that are incredibly linear, but for the most part, the game actually takes place in an open world, and it's not just one open world, but several open worlds. And you're free to just go off the beaten path and do as many open world activities as you want, and ooh, it is great. I'm gonna just say it right now, the open world in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is so good. This is the best open world of any Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy games have always kind of struggled with open worlds. I feel like the second best one was 15, and 15's was just okay. This is how I want an open world Final Fantasy game to be like. These open worlds are dense. There is a lot to see and do. There's a bunch of different activities. The side content is meaningful. It's rewarding. It's actually worth a damn, and most importantly, it's fun. You'll actually want to do the side content because you'll have a good time doing it. Of course, if you want, you can actually skip all of the open world stuff. You can skip all the optional side content and just go through the story. And I mean, that's cool and all, but I really don't recommend that. I recommend you check out as much as you can of the open world. The side missions you get are actually interesting. They further character arcs and flesh them out in ways I didn't even know were possible. A lot of the time they lead to even more side missions. Sometimes they lead to mini games, and the mini games are actually really good in this. I thought the mini games are fine in Remake, but the mini games in Rebirth are really good. They made Fort Condor fun. How they did that, you know, they just worked some magic out here, because I never liked Fort Condor in the original, but here I really enjoyed it. But it's not just Fort Condor. All of the mini games are good. Queen's Blood is mad good. I don't even like card games. I don't even really like Gwent, but this is hella good. This is way better than Triple Triad in my opinion. I never understood why people like that. This is mad good. I hope this becomes its own game. I love the card game of this. I had way more fun than I imagined. All of the mini games, I had way more fun than I imagined I ever would. The mini games are actually good. The open world is well designed. This game has a wonderful sense of exploration. You'll want to spend as much time in the open world as possible and fight as many things as you want. And speaking of fighting, we do have the combat, which is very, very similar to the remake. It is a bit more refined, but it uses the same hybrid of real time, but you can also do actions once the ATB bar fills up. This has been expanded on though. There's a bunch of team actions. That's really cool. You get a ton of new abilities, and there really is just more depth when it comes to the combat, not just because you have more party members since Yuffie, Red 13, and Kate Sith join you, but each of the characters that return also feel like they have some new moves up their sleeve, and I think that's really cool. All the characters do play mad different from each other, and I can really appreciate just how different all of the play styles are. They're all incredibly fun also. Of course, then there's material returning, which is basically the same as the previous game, and equipping all of your equipment, whether it's your weapon, armor, etc. All of that is well and good. Like, when it comes to the general RPG aspects of this game, I have no issues. I think it is like a perfect blend of action, gameplay, and RPG elements. It's a really nice balance, and then of course it still is a modern AAA game, so there'll be plenty of instances where you're just walking slowly forward, listening to exposition. But like Remake, I really enjoy this. I like the pacing of the game. I like how everything progresses. The storytelling's really great, and it's just crazy how fleshed out literally every aspect of this game is. This is not a short game. If you do even a little bit of the side content, you're looking at 50 plus hours. This is a very long game, and it is incredibly rewarding to see where the story goes, where the characters go, how they all end up. Like, I still can't believe this game's real. Like, low-key, I can't believe it's real. Everything is just so realized, and I think it's great for people who love the original Final Fantasy VII and people who didn't play the original Final Fantasy VII. I think like everybody can enjoy this. Everybody can at least enjoy the music. The OST is fantastic in this game, man. It might be better than remakes. It's that good. And so at this point, I'm sure you're wondering, is there anything wrong with the game? Is there anything my boy Jonathan doesn't like about it? Well, I can say that while this doesn't affect me, if you didn't like the pacing of Remake, you're probably not going to like the pacing and speed of this game, as it's very similar. It is a little faster and to the point, but it still is relatively slow and takes its time. That's not a problem for me, but I know plenty of people didn't like the pacing of Remake. Oh, that and Chadley continues to be like the only unlikable character in the game. Seriously, the main cast of characters, even the side characters, even the villains are all likable in this game. And then there's Chadley, who is really just there. But he actually does get a lot of backstory, but I still just was like, eh. At the end of the day, it might seem that I'm, as the kids call it, glazing over this game, but I really am just head over heels for this game. I would not be surprised if it's my favorite game of the year along with Infinite Wealth. I have both of them at the top of the mountain right now. They're both just excellent games that I really have trouble finding faults with. Like, yes, I totally could sit here and start to nitpick little things about both games, but both of them do so many things that are right and are just fantastic that it really overshadows like even the smallest of issues. As of right now, this really is easily in my top 5 Final Fantasy games. It's just fantastic, and I wouldn't be surprised if down the road almost every Final Fantasy game is low-key structured in this way, because they really just hit the nail on the head here. They really just figured out what they wanted this to be, and honestly, it has me dying inside to know that it might be another 3 or 4 years before we get the next game, because this is just phenomenal, and I can't wait to see more of it. And it really reaffirms that with Final Fantasy VII, man, it just hit different. I have no problem recommending the game to everybody. I've just been gushing about it for a few minutes now, but I just wanted to get it out there. Go play this game. If you have a PS5, go play it. It is totally worth it. Play the remake first, though. Otherwise, shit ain't going to make sense. But despite all that praising, I don't think it's the best of the Final Fantasy VII games. But here we have it, the original Final Fantasy VII that came out all the way back in 1997 on the PS1. The original Final Fantasy VII has been talked to death by seemingly everybody, it feels like at this point, but here I am to also talk about it because I love this game. It's probably my favorite RPG of all time, and you know, Rebirth is really, really great. And in a few years, I might actually change my order, but at this time, man, nothing's gonna beat the original Final Fantasy VII for me. This game just had it all. And sure, it's not the flashiest and it isn't the best presentation-wise now, but nothing hits like the original Final Fantasy VII. There's a reason all these other games showed up. It's because the original game really is that good. It was an incredibly ambitious, creative, just unforgettable experience. It was back then, and it still is nowadays. I still think this game is fantastic, and it has aged incredibly well. That is outside of certain elements of the presentation, like some of these character models, I won't lie to you, even for the PS1, they don't exactly look great, but it really doesn't hinder my experience at all, and I do feel rather nostalgic for some of these bad character models. At least the backgrounds, in my opinion, still look pretty good. They look like a painting, and I've always thought Cloud running around on them is quite novel. But when you're going around on the world map and it's just this flat texture, yeah, it's not the most exciting thing in the world. At the very least, in battle, I think the presentation is still very good. And then we have the soundtrack. Oh, the music, I could go off about this game's music, man. It is my favorite favorite soundtrack of any RPG, maybe of any game. I love the music to death. There's a reason it's been remixed, redone in so many different ways. It is stupidly good. Like, it is ridiculously good. I love plenty of other Final Fantasy games soundtracks, but none of them have ever even come close to 7 in my opinion. 8's is great. Rebirth also is a great soundtrack, but the original game, nothing's ever going to top it for me, man. I really love the soundtrack. When it comes to the gameplay, it actually was decently different from Final Fantasy VI. The game is incredibly linear, usually just seeing your character going from point A to B. There really isn't all that much to explore here. You can walk around and interact with the environment and get into random encounters. A majority of the game is combat, and the combat is still very good in my opinion. It's aged very well in my opinion. It uses the ATB system where the bar fills up and then you can do your move, you can do an attack, there's spells, there's a few additional moves. You do get your limit break when you've done enough damage or taken enough damage, and these are super moves that look awesome. The game does use materia, which basically has been the same ever since this game, where you equip materia to your weapon and armor, and there is actually a decent amount of strategy when it comes to equipping materia, especially when it comes to linking them. It's actually very cool, and it really shows from this original game that they struck gold when it came to materia, and that's why they haven't really changed it over the years. It was good then, it's still very good now, and there's a bunch of different tactics and again strategies you can come up with for the materia. I think the battle system, it was great then, it's still solid enough now. I'm sure plenty of people will think it's not exciting enough, but I very much think it is. I was engaged the first time, I was engaged the second time, and every time after that I've still been very engaged with the battle system. It still can be challenging at times, and they find plenty of ways to mix everything up. All of the characters do feel different from each other. They aren't, crazy different like the remake or rebirth, but they still are rather different from each other, and your party formation really does matter, especially towards the end of the game. Look, is it the most original or innovative battle system the series has ever seen? No, it's not, and it doesn't play all that different from several other Final Fantasy games, but it feels the most refined, and it's my favorite battle system, at least of the numbered titles. Yeah, it's my favorite. The way everything comes together, I just love it. Something else that I really do love about the original Final Fantasy VII is the progression. It's very different from the remakes. It moves at a breakneck speed compared to the remakes. You are constantly going to new and different areas. You're in Midgar a few hours, then you're in the open world where you can explore, but you'll be funneled through a couple different locations, and before you know it, you've gone to a dozen different locations in less than 30 hours. And it's just very different from how games are nowadays, and I can really appreciate it. It feels like you're always somewhere new, you're always doing something different. I like how you can just walk around the world map. Sure, there's plenty of random encounters, and at times they can be a bit annoying, but again, the pacing, it's really good. And I guess now is a good time to bring it up, but the story in the original game, the story is just fucking incredible. I have nothing else to say about it other than that, I could talk about the story for 20-30 minutes, my favorite characters, moments, how good the antagonist is, etc., but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just say you need to experience it. You really need to experience the story of the original Final Fantasy VII. Remake and Rebirth is great, but the original game, oh, it is so good. The storytelling's fantastic. Sure, it's very 90s, and I'm sure plenty of people won't like how much text there is, but I think the story, it's just stupid good. I legit was hooked right from the get-go. The game has a fantastic opening, and it's really strong all the way until the very end. There really isn't a dull moment. There's not any parts of the story where I'm like, oh, I hate this, or when I go back to replaying the game, there's not any parts where I'm like, oh my god, I don't want to experience this in the story again. The only time I ever feel anything like that is kind of with the mini games. This game has several mini games in it, and some of them are fine and have aged decently. Other ones, yeah, they're not so great. Snowboarding was never exactly my favorite, but I wouldn't say any of them are like unbelievably bad or have aged terribly. At worst, they're just a minor annoyance, but none of them last very long either. But I will concede there and say that the game is not perfect. It does have a few flaws to it. That and going in the submarine kinda sucks. It's not awful, but I'm just not huge on the submarine part. But these issues really don't detract from the overall experience. The atmosphere, the music, the gameplay, the storytelling, it just all comes together in a way that very few other video games have ever come together for me personally. You can say it's just my nostalgia going wild for this game, and it's not as good as I remember it, but every time I've come back to the game, I'm continually impressed by just so many different aspects of this game. I haven't even brought up the CGI cutscenes cutscenes, which looked amazing for the time. They even look decent nowadays. This game, it's just a masterpiece. It really is just a masterpiece. It's one of my favorite, like seriously, favorite video games of all time. It's in the top 10 easily. It's probably, again, my favorite RPG of all time. I don't know if I'll ever play an RPG that will ever top the highs and feelings that I felt with this original game. Rebirth is certainly up there, but the original game, like, holy shit, it is a masterclass. Again, just a legendary video game that I think everybody who breathes air should check out. It is that good.
Well, that's it for this video. I'm gonna go hang out with my pal Sephiroth, and if you made it to this part, you know our secret code word's gonna be jar. It's in this little mason jar. I think I should have gotten a bigger jar. Well, I'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.